Okay, we're back. Welcome back, everybody. Want to just thank you for staying with us. I hope you enjoyed the sessions with enforcement and education. Those are always a favorite. Once again, I just want to thank our sponsors. We've got Heritage, LRS, Stovalex, Swelco, Swank, and Waste Management that are our virtual sponsors this year, as well as our in-person conference sponsors for next year as well. They will stay with us. So we did appreciate them staying on while we went virtual, and we appreciate that very much. Also, I just want to remind you, that's not what I wanted to remind you about. I wanted to remind you that we are going to have our conference in person, as I mentioned, next year, November 3rd and 4th at Starve Rock. So please, 2022. So I'm going to bring on board our guests for today, our session on solar and CO2 and panel recycling. Our guests today are Dave Wilms, who I need to have him come back on. I don't know where Dave went. So I'm going to hold tight here for a minute. We've got Litan Wu from ERI and Dave Hirschler from ERI that are going to join us as well. So I'm just holding tight for Dave when he comes back. Sorry about that, folks. He was with me just a moment ago. Let's see. And here he is. Okay. Welcome back, Dave.
Thank you.
That's okay. You need to share your screen as soon as possible for me. So I can
Okay.
and your camera's a little low.
Yeah.
All right, there you are. That's okay. So Dave Wilms is with us today. Dave is a energy aficionado, former teacher, has been working in the solar energy for many years. He's going to come back on screen hopefully in just a moment. Dave Hirschler, some of you may have met Dave in the past conferences and some other things with the ERI, Electronics Recyclers International. Dave works in the compliance with legislative programs for the whole country. So he's a very busy man. And Litan Wu works in compliance with ERI, with solar and batteries. So just share that a little with you. And as soon as Dave shares his screen here, we'll get that going. I'm going to take Dave and Litan down here, and we will get Dave set up.
I don't see the screen share here.
The little share button down at the bottom.
Yeah.
It's the little screen with the plus in it.
Oh, okay. There we go. Share screen. Did that work?
It's coming in, I think. It hasn't. I don't see it yet, Dave.
All right.
Usually you get those two questions before you can bring it up.
Share. There we go.
There it is. And you want to go full screen with that?
There we go.
Okay. Going to add that in. All right. So I'm going to pass it on to Dave here. I'm going to step away, and we'll take questions through the chat. So please go ahead and add any comments you have. We'll address those as the presentation evolves here. All right. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Pete. Yes, good morning, everyone. Well, this is an exciting thing for me. I haven't participated at this level in the waste world very much. I have participated a lot in the areas of solar, both at the state level as well as the national level. But I've been monitoring some of the programs and sessions, and they're very exciting. Basically, a little background, I was Northern Environmental Educator of the Year for the northern part of Illinois. I did lots of labs for teaching students, mostly climate naysayers, about how a 2-degree warming of our oceans could be bad. I basically had them heat up water in a bottle and used a micro pipette, and they could see that the water expanded with 2 degrees of warming. And then I told them, well, the oceans are about 18,000 feet deep. And if you multiply that small amount of expansion times the depth of the ocean, what does that do to sea level? And a lot of students, they had their eyes pop open quite a bit with that. I also work with the a Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. That's about 250 communities in the Chicago area, and I'm on the Energy and Environment Committee with them. I'm on the local Sustained Libertyville Commission, and I also do consulting work in terms of solar installations. I took a lot of my work from as an AP environmental science teacher at Stevenson High School, and have used that as I help people think through their questions with solar. And I also work with a large company that does installations. I have about basically 4 megawatts in Lake County, 1 megawatt under contract, 3 megawatts installed. And so I'm trying to help green up our county as best as I can. And I truly believe this, that if somebody wants to inspire others to do something, that they really need to, walk the walk, and if they're going to talk the talk. And so when I moved to Liberty, well, the whole circular economy is important, because just because you make something and use it for a little bit doesn't mean that the problem of getting rid of it is over. And, the saying that reusing something is better than reducing it, because if you're still using things, and recycling is good at the end of the life, but there's sometimes other options. And just talking to Pete this morning, he and I came up with an idea for a new business model that I think might actually be worthwhile. And we'll get to that at the end of the session, so stay tuned. A Chinese proverb was, act like what you do is the law. So as we walk through our daily lives, if you toss a little scrap of paper out the window, if that were a law that everybody in America had to do that, you'd have 330 million pieces of paper fly out the window. And that helps magnify the importance of what we each do personally. When I talk to kids about what they can do, 3rd and 4th graders, in terms of helping the energy challenge, a lot of times it's easy for them to feel powerless, but I say, act like what you do is the law. So if each one of you changed 1 LED light bulb, and we have 118 million households all reducing their electric consumption, basically that would allow us to close down 1 450 megawatt coal plant. So with those kinds of concepts, we really have to rethink the way we act. And this is a picture of my house. Now I'm telling a personal story. And when I moved into Libertyville, I had this little house, and right next door to it, to the right, somebody tore down a house very similar to mine and put up that great big mansion. And a lot of people said, hey, Dave, your lot's worth more than your house is. Why don't you tear down your house and do the same thing? You could just raise it, in the sense of raising it as in tearing it down. And I said, well, that's an interesting concept. But rather than just throw it away, because it had a nice watertight basement and the wood floors and everything was already done, and a roof system that worked, what I decided to do is just kind of redesign the roof line a little bit. And then I got ready and I raised it. So I went straight up vertically, and I put in a 9-foot basement, 10-foot first floor. And so this is the house today. And if people were able to take houses and just raise them up, and by the way, you're asking the question, how much did it cost to raise? Well, it was about $20,000 to raise, but I kept my roof, all my plaster work, my electrical was in. I kept the foundation, and just to throw it out in dumpsters would have been about probably $6,000 to $10,000. So it didn't cost much to save a whole bunch of materials. Well, let's get focused on what we're wanting to talk today about. And one thing that people don't understand is that all the fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, all come from the sun. And plants and microorganisms in the oceans are kind of the middlemen there, and they trap the energy from the sun and convert it into molecules that we can use for energy. But why don't we just get rid of the middleman and use the sun directly ourselves? And And that's really a way more efficient proposition than using fossil fuels. And when we talk about energy in general, energy drives everything. And the nice thing is that electricity can do about anything that any fossil fuel can do. And most of the time, electricity is much more efficient. So that's what we want to do. And I watched a webinar last week, and it was saying basically if we want to transition to our transportation sector to electricity, we have to actually increase our electricity production by about 30%, which is quite a bit. So simultaneously, as we're talking about reducing our carbon footprints, we need to also talk about increasing our electricity supply. What are some of the incentives and motivators for using solar? Well, first of all, you have to buy electricity. And in Illinois, we have relatively inexpensive electricity compared to many parts in the country. But even that smaller amount of electricity cost can be cut in half basically by going with solar. The nice thing is we also have federal tax shelters. We have what they call the investment tax credit. So any business can get about 26% reduction in their taxes if they install solar electricity. At the same time, you can accelerate the depreciation as a business. And what that does, it cuts the cost down even more. So about 50% of the cost of a solar installation can be reduced by a business that pays taxes, but that's not available to churches and schools and municipalities. And that's one of the things I've worked really hard on in the last 3 years, is trying to find sources of people that want to invest in solar and want to help municipalities and schools invest in solar, and take advantage of the tax breaks and pass some of those tax breaks on to the municipalities or schools. And the two schools on the left are two schools that I wrote a grant for, and those are both here in Libertyville. And the grants for building solar have pretty much dried up. So we have to move to Plan B, which is basically try to find investors that have tax liability that want to help build solar. And there's a lot of people that want to do that. In the lower right corner, there's a church in Barrington, Illinois, that had two parishioners that wanted to buy solar for their church because it had a brand new roof. And so I helped them organize an LLC. They bought the solar for the church, and it's now reducing the costs of electricity, and also they'll be able to eventually donate it to the church. So that's very good. But these require financing strategies, and they can be set up, and I'm glad to have that set up so that we can do that with private investors, as well as some investing, what do they call it, businesses that have deep pockets. What's standing in the way of a lot of the solar development? Well, we have a $10 trillion fossil fuel energy industry, and they're powerful and they're connected. And that means that change is slow, but we're changing the physics of the atmosphere. Basically, small wave infrared radiation can hit the surface of the Earth. It becomes long wave infrared radiation, and that's absorbed by clouds. And that's what's causing our planet to heat up. Photosynthesis, pulling CO2 and water and putting them together to make carbohydrate by plants, cannot keep up with our CO2 output. So basically, every year we're adding another layer to the Earth's atmosphere that's acting like a blanket and raising the temperature. And we have to stop adding that blanket. Basically, the CO2 in our atmosphere lasts about 100 years. And so whatever we do to reduce our CO2 output is very important, but there is going to be a lag time between what we do and when it's going to actually change the temperature of the planet. So we have to work as quickly as possible, as scientists are saying, and move in this direction as quickly as we can. We know that there are lots of costs associated with storms that are being increased by climate change. Basically, keeping the energy at the surface of the Earth is giving wind and oceans a lot of energy to dissipate, and that dissipation causes a lot of storms. So even Libertyville, I'm on the storm, not at the stormwater part of the municipality, but I'm on the Sustain Libertyville Commission. And our small village here is paying $55 million to increase the stormwater options that we have to get rid of the rain that comes in greater amounts than we ever predicted. So we're throwing new weather situations at the planet that we haven't really seen before. And you see it everywhere, from the fires in the west to the droughts in the west. We see hurricanes in the southeast. We see slower moving thunderstorms move through the Midwest that's causing big flooding events. We're seeing more rain in the spring and fall and less in the summer. So there's a lot of changes that are happening that are not really good for the species called humans. A lot of times when I talk to people about the economics of climate change, they always throw very specific numbers at me and say, see, this is not a problem. But I think this graph is nice because it shows you the costs of storm damage from 1980 all the way up until 2020. And just anybody can see that there's a trend here that cannot be sustained. And that's what we want to do when we move to clean energy. And we have climate mitigation. We're trying to slow down the climate damage. We still need energy. And the bottom line is sustainability. And I'm going to pause here. There's an African saying that says that sustainability is enough for all forever. And I just love that definition, because what we do today, we want to be able to pass on to future generations. And that's the way we should be acting. There is no magic bullet. There's a whole bunch of buckshot that's going to help solve this problem. First of all, we have to change our perceptions a little bit. Every rooftop could be potential areas for clean energy installations. Photovoltaic panels, open fields are potential clean energy producing areas. By people composting and saving their food and yard waste, we can reduce methane production in landfills. We need to insulate walls, update heating systems, put better windows, tighten things up. And all of this is going to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels for heating and cooling. There's been some great legislation. People haven't paid much attention to it, but HFCs are one of the most important greenhouse products from air conditioning systems. And the EPA just a couple of weeks ago helped pass some legislation that's going to phase those out in the next 10 years, and that's very important. One of the things I did as a teacher is I always tried to help people understand and take personal responsibility for their actions. And as we move to electric vehicles, and I drive an electric Bolt right now, it's parked outside, but it is so much fun. It's a quick little car and it's so efficient. But when we look at many of the SUVs, and I went to Highland Park High School, I don't know if I should say that, but anyway, I was there a couple of days ago talking to some of the student groups there. I took a picture out front because of the 8 vehicles waiting to pick up students, all 8 were SUVs, big ones, nice ones, comfortable. But they have they get about 15 miles per gallon. And what people don't realize is that one SUV at 15 miles per gallon, driving about 150,000 miles, is going to create 250,000 pounds of CO2 as the gasoline is converted into carbon dioxide. 1 gallon of gas creates 7 pounds. I'm sorry, 1 gallon of gas that weighs 7 pounds creates about 20 pounds of CO2. And the reason is that it increases in weight, it pulls oxygen in, combines that with the octane, which is 8 carbons put together, and the weight increases, and so 1 gallon of gas can create 20 pounds of CO2. So if you put 15 gallons of gas in your car, you're just going to throw 30 pounds, 300 pounds of carbon dioxide into the air. So what do we do for solutions? Well, obviously we have, globally, we have the talks coming up in another week. Nationally, we need to get some of the clean energy legislation passed here so we can go to the global meetings and say, hey, the United States is doing a good job. We do have state laws, and the great news is in the last month or so, we've passed some clean energy legislation, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and that's going to help move solar forward in the state of Illinois. At the community level, communities can put solar on wastewater treatment plants, libraries, fire departments, police department roof systems, and not only save money, but they're going to reduce their carbon footprints considerably. And they can, by walking the walk, model for the community how solar can help them reduce costs. But also, it's all of our personal responsibilities too. This is something that's going to happen in the next 50 years. We're going to see either us turn a corner and move towards clean energy and reducing climate impacts, or our kids are going to see the results of our inaction. The good news is, a couple of years ago, I got asked by the Department of Energy to come and help spend a lot of money. There was $168 million that the administration a couple of years ago wasn't able to find, and we were to invest it into the National Renewable Energy Labs, a lot of research about solar, and develop laws that help organizations move towards solar. And I worked in the Solar Energy Technology Office to spend that money, and we worked hard to try to spend it very wisely. A lot of the money was spent on research, and basically what a solar panel does, it traps the sunlight, the photons, and the light excites electrons. Electrons jump up and move away, and the next thing you know, you're creating electric current. And it's interesting from a biological perspective for me, is that when sunlight hits a chloroplast, much of the same thing happens. Electrons are raised to a high energy level, and then that electrical energy and those electrons are then trapped in stable molecules called carbohydrates. And that's what basically makes up all of our fossil fuels. So we're doing a physical process where we use the photons of light to make a current, but organisms do exactly the same thing. Let's talk about some great news. And I love this chart, because what it does, this Lizard who put this together is an investment group that does a lot of analysis of electric markets and where to invest money. And they obviously are spending a lot of time calculating the average costs of electrical production by different mechanisms. But if you look here at the bottom of the chart, wind energy is about 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's how much it costs to make it. Solar energy is about 0.5 cent. I'm sorry, 5 cents. Natural gas is about 6 cents per kilowatt hour. Coal is 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And there's a lot of subsidies that help coal. So when coal says, hey, you shouldn't give subsidies to renewable energy, well, there's a whole bunch of subsidies that are helping the coal industry and oil industry do their jobs. So if we got rid of all the subsidies, it would be a wonderful thing, except in the top one, which is called nuclear energy. Nuclear energy takes about $10 billion to build a plant, which is very expensive. And then the cost for producing a kilowatt hour is really quite high, about 15 cents. As a matter of fact, much of CEJA, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, that money was made available to renewable energy because the nuclear power industry in Illinois, which employs a lot of people, could not afford to compete on the open market. So without subsidies, they would have to close. Am I for subsidies for nuclear power? Absolutely, at this point, for existing plants, because they don't make carbon dioxide. They help reduce our carbon footprint. So we need to keep those plants going as long as we can, and that's going to be a good thing. Now, one of the problems or good things about today is that things change rapidly. There was a coal company out in Colorado that was going to close one of their coal plants, and they thought, well, we get a lot of sun out here, we've got clear skies, why don't we do an RFP, a request for proposals, to see what it would cost to build a wind farm or solar farm and add battery storage so that we could have that facility kind of take the place of the coal plant. And here's what they found out. This is Xcel Energy. If they built if they built a wind farm and added battery storage, the median bid was 2 cents a kilowatt hour for wind energy. Battery storage and wind, 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Battery storage and solar, about 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So in a very short period of time, the technology is changing so rapidly, and the process of the building solar and wind is becoming so economically beneficial that it's a beautiful thing. I will throw this out there, that I was talking to a congressman recently, like a week ago, had 2 meetings, and I asked the question, why aren't people seeing the economic advantages of switching to clean energy? Because the costs are so low. And he said the problem is that people don't look 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road. They want to look at the here and now. Does it cost something in the budget today? And it does. But the good news is the money that is saved is going to go right back into the economy, creating more tax revenues. And those tax revenues that are created by the energy savings of today are going to more than pay for all the incentives that might come about. So we're at a really good point in our history as a species, that the solution is cheaper than either A, ignoring the problem of climate issues, and B, it's cheaper than what we're already doing. So we should do this anyway, even if we didn't have the threats of climate. So what has Illinois done? Well, they have a renewable energy portfolio standard where they're trying to move and produce a certain amount of energy from clean energy sources. They passed legislation that says that if somebody puts solar on their business or home or a wastewater treatment plant, that if they put energy onto the grid, that there's going to be a credit for that energy that's exported. There's performance payments so that if somebody builds something and it doesn't work, they don't get paid for it. So you get paid only when you actually produce the clean energy that you are hoping to get some incentives for. They carved out a space for solar energy, and they have some for wind as well. They guarantee that people that want to add solar can actually connect to the grid, and not all states have that legislation. So we're ahead of many states in our country with that. And we do have an electricity cost that's pretty cheap here, but as I said earlier, the costs of solar and wind are cheaper than using the fossil fuels and the nuclear energy that comes off the grid. How does solar work? Well, you have panels on the roof or on the ground. They absorb the sunlight, convert the sun energy, the light energy into current. That current goes into an inverter. The inverter monitors what's going on in the grid, and what it does, it takes the direct current, DC energy, off the panels and changes it into alternating current, AC energy, and it matches exactly what's on the grid. So you can have the electricity coming out of an inverter, and it's exactly like what's on the grid. And that electricity then can either be used at the building site, or it can go onto the grid and not cause issues. So we have this opportunity in the state to do solar. And on the upper left, we have a roof situation, a roof mount, where you have ballasted panels that face south and make electricity. Over on the right side, this is a newer type of roof system, which I really like, where your panels face east and west rather than just all face south. So there's no shading issues, and you get greater density of electricity production by using that kind of racking system. And then the lower left, we have a ground mount system, and those are placed on areas that aren't currently being used. And the ground mount systems are actually have a better angle on them, so they're actually more efficient at producing electricity. I wanted to go back and reiterate this concept, that if we use east-west facing panels in the upper left, you get more production per square foot of roof space than you do if you face all your panels south. But not all solar installers have that racking system. But to me, since putting solar on any rooftop is a long-term investment, by increasing your power production from a roof area, the more you can do that, the more savings you're going to see in the long run. And this is what it looks like. And you can see that there's very little room for wind to get under the panels. And so you actually need less ballasting for this type of system, which means that more roof systems that are close to their maximum capacity can support solar. As a matter of fact, the middle of that system, there's hardly any weight that needs to be added because there's no way for the wind to get under the panels. So that's one of the new things. Here's a ground mount. And those are very efficient. I helped put a 2 megawatt ground mount up at a mining area in Lake County. It's Thielen Sand and Gravel. And it's a 2 megawatt system, and they're saving $200,000 a year by making their own electricity. The cool thing is the gravel pit only operates pretty much during the daytime. So anything that they make from the electric panels is actually going to be able to be consumed by them, and that saves them a whole bunch of energy. There is an inverter rebate, and this has to do with net metering. So basically, you get an inverter rebate if you allow ComEd or Ameren to control your meter. And this became important in a place called Hawaii, because they're paying about 25 cents a kilowatt hour there. And when people were offered the opportunity to install solar, the whole islands would just put as many solar panels as they could on their homes and businesses. And everything was wonderful until a cloud moved in the middle of the day. So an island that was producing most of its electricity with renewable solar power, all of a sudden would be in kind of a blackout condition as clouds moved over the island rather rapidly. And so the utility there, realizing that they had to not do that, because when the production dropped rapidly, it caused brownouts, and that was bad for equipment. So what they did, they re-communicated with all the citizenry there, and they changed some of the inverters so they could control them. As clouds were moving in, they could throttle back on the solar production and ramp up their diesel generators to produce electricity that way, and so they have a stable grid. And in the United States, within the lower 48, utilities are seeing what happened in Hawaii, and now utilities are offering a little bit of money if you allow them to control the inverters and the output that they have. And that utility rebate is about 15% of the cost of a solar installation. If you take the rebate, you get a 1-to-1 wholesale price out and a wholesale price back, and that generally is about 4 cents per kilowatt hour. If you don't take the inverter rebate, so in other words, you're going to pay about 15% more for the installation. Basically, you get a 1-to-1 cost of 1 kilowatt hour produced that's exported. You get that same amount of credit coming back. And that means your credit is going to be about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And I've done some number crunching on this, and basically in about 10 years, you make up for the inverter rebate. And after that, you're saving more money than you would if you took the inverter rebate. But this is something that anybody that's thinking about solar should actually do some number crunching on and see what is their best option. Inverters last about 10 to 14 years, and then they need replacement. The things to consider there is that you can buy lifetime or 25-year inverter warranties, and I like doing that because it's less expensive than probably replacing an inverter down the line. And I tend to recommend that people do that when they do the initial installation. Here are the 2 schools that I helped install solar on. Highland Middle School is in the lower left, and On the upper right is Butterfield Elementary School. Both of those together have produced about 5.6 million kilowatt hours. Times 10 cents, they've saved about $560,000 so far. And they've also displaced about 10 million pounds of CO2, and that's what I get excited about. Yes, it's nice to see the carbon footprints of schools go down, because schools are notoriously kind of energy heavy. When I did the calculations for their solar energy, I just took the average cost of solar across the year, which is about 9.5 cents a kilowatt hour. And you can see the darker green shadowed area in the bottom, showing you when solar would be most efficient, or yes, most efficient. So April, May, June, that's when you get a lot of production. You see the cost, or the energy demand highest in December, January, and February. And that's because they're using it for blowers, and a lot of the HVAC system uses a lot of electricity. But I was wrong. So 9.5 cents turns out to not be accurate in terms of calculating the solar savings. If you look at May, June, and July, the cost of electricity was close to 12, 13, 14 cents a kilowatt hour. And in June, it went as high as almost 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So since those were the times that the electricity was being produced, we even got greater savings than what we had anticipated. And that was exciting. So I was glad to see that. If I'm going to be wrong, I'd rather be wrong so that the consumer would save more money than I was predicting. But the other thing that's real important is that if I'm going to zip back, don't want to make you dizzy. If you look at the school at the upper right, this is Butterfield School. There was so much shade on the roof, and the heat could escape out from under the panels, that instead of using 2 large air conditioning systems in the summertime, they were actually able to switch to just one chiller. And so they were saved money, not just from the electricity being produced, but they saved money on cooling the school as well. So let's talk a little bit about the costs here of solar. The solar costs are, this is for a 1 megawatt installation. And I'm looking at my numbers here. And it looks like I did not write down the actual cost. That's kind of confusing. But anyway, if we look at a 1 megawatt system, over there on the left, if we add up all of the incentives, the total incentives are about $1 million. We have an inverter rebate, we have SRECs. Those are solar renewable energy credits that the state pays over 7 years. Those are worth about, they help reduce the cost of electricity by about 43%. The federal tax credit, if you're a taxable entity, it saves about $250,000 or 26%. Depreciation, you can take that equipment and depreciate it. Instead of over 5 years, you can depreciate it in the first year, and that's another close to $200,000. And so your total incentives are about $1 million. And that means that if you take the cost of that system, the final cost is much lower. As a matter of fact, for a business here in Libertyville, I wrote a proposal for a business that actually is going to get more incentive money than what it costs to put the solar in. So the incentives are very good here in the state of Illinois. Over on the right, for municipality, they can't get the federal tax credits or the depreciation. But if you work with an investment group that can actually take the federal tax breaks and depreciation, they can pass some of those savings onto the municipality. So that reduces the cost of electricity. And over on the left, and the numbers I'd really like to focus on, because the numbers above can change and vary from project to project. But the levelized cost, that means over 30 years, including the operations and maintenance, a business can end up paying about $0.01 per kilowatt hour over the life of the system. For a municipality that's working with a tax investor, they can end up paying about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's the average cost of electricity over the 25 years. So you're reducing the electric costs by about half. So instead of 10 cents a kilowatt hour, you can own your own system and pay 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So can public entities afford to add solar to their facilities? Well, I was at a Metropolitan Mayor's Conference last week. We had a national EPA person helping talk about the need for climate resilience and what communities can spend money on, like stormwater drainage. And so my question, which I asked, was, what's the balance? What's the balance of the costs between building resilience and reducing the cause of climate change? Because there's only so much money that municipalities have, whether it's a wastewater treatment plant or a large sports center for their citizens. Should we try to reduce carbon footprints as well, because we have limited budgets? And that's what I like to do. And I've focused on this for 3 years. It's finally coming up with a system that basically municipalities don't have to spend any of their own money, and they can add solar and reduce their costs immediately, having savings in the first year. One of the challenges that we're talking about today is, what do we do with our old solar panels? And that's a big one. You know, if we're going to do a cradle to the grave discussion with solar panels, that's a problem. Even though the electricity costs are reduced, you still have a product that at the end of 25 years or 30 years is going to perhaps be needing to get replaced. Now I'm going to go back to that slide for a second. And so one of the things we want to do is think about this. I have one slide I'm going to skip to. If we look at the value of the metals and the aluminum frames of solar panels and some of the other more expensive trace metals inside, you have about $3 worth of materials in each panel. And I did a little research, and it might be corrected in our next speaker, looking at transportation and recycling of old solar panels, and they estimate the cost to be around $12 per panel. So that means if you look at the transportation and recycling at $12, you get a value of $3 from the materials. It costs about $9 for somebody to get rid of solar panels. So this doesn't really look too good economically. But what else could we do to raise the money to pay for this? And this is what I was talking about with Pete, which is something that's kind of an interesting idea. Let's rethink disposal. Why not reuse the panels? We have a lot of people that don't have any solar panels, and solar panels are pretty durable. The current panels that we use are about 400 watts per panel. The older panels were about 250 watts. At 25 years, they're still guaranteed to be producing about 80% of their production. And so a 250 watt panel at 80% production is equivalent to a 200 watt panel. The cost of a solar panel today has gone from $10 a watt down to just the panel itself, not installation, down to about 30 cents a watt. So the panel would be worth, at the wholesale price today, a 200 watt panel would be worth about $60. Why not reuse that panel? At $30 for panel collection, testing, refurbishing, and transportation, there's room for profit. And so this does look good economically. For tax write-offs for businesses to recycle their panels, I would imagine that there would be some foundations that would like to help collect the older panels and ship them to other countries that still need electricity. We might be able to develop a new business model here when it comes to the end of the life cycle for solar panels. Are all solar panels going to be able to get reused? No, but with some of the money from the ones that can be reused and reissued, that profit can help pay for those that actually need to be ground up and recycled. So I'm going to go back a couple of slides because I added these slides just after talking to Pete, an hour ago. We have some great news. There's a company called Form Energy that two people, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, invested in. And they actually have found a very stable way to store electricity using iron and air. Basically, they rust iron and derust iron, and in that process are able to generate electric current. The great news is iron's abundant, non-toxic, so is air. The bad news is it's heavy, but that means it might be perfect for putting into a garage at a large business or a closet at a home. And so we can create these battery systems that are stable, don't catch fire, and are made of abundant elements. So that's right around the corner. So when we talk about change and resilience and trying to have a future that can sustain us individually and personally, as well as creating a future that our kids can enjoy fruitful lives in, we have to start someplace. And this conversation cannot be just dealt with at the congressional level or the state level. It has to start with us. We need to get the word out that solar is cheap. Solar is a great option, that there are ways to finance it so you don't have to come up with a big cost, but at the same time that financing can be paid off through just the savings. And that's what we need to do. We really need to broaden this conversation because according to the scientists, we have about 8 years left to really reduce our carbon footprint by about 50%. And everybody is going to have to pull their own weight, both people that lives in homes like myself and businesses and municipalities. We all have to make this happen. It's a heavy lift, but if we share the weight amongst all of us, I think it's something that we can totally do. So there's great news that the price of changing towards clean energy is much cheaper than keeping on the path that we're currently on. And thank you. That's the end.
All right. Well, thank you, Dave. That was a lot of great information. Something to think about. I like your last slide there, the me to we.
Yeah.
It's very, very important. So we're going to hold most of the questions here. I think people have some comments, which is appreciated. Dave, you'll be able to see those too. As I take your slides down here. Again, Dave gave a nice presentation. I'm going to bring up Litan Wu here and also add her slides, and we'll step down. Dave, stay with us. So again, we've got Litan Liu here with Electronic Recycling International, or ERI, as they like to be called. We're going to kind of segue into a little bit of what Dave alluded to, and that's the panels and how we manage them in the afterlife or interim from going back into something new. So I'm going to pass it on over to Litan, and I'm going to step away, and you've got the mic, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Pete, and also thanks, Dave, to bring up the solar panels. There's also inverter that is associated with the renewable energy system, and also the battery storage system for solar panels is also a new type of the batteries that we will need to think about how to process them when they reach to their end of life. But hi everyone, my name is Litan Liu. I am the environmental specialist at ERI. Part of my focus is on solar panel recycling program and also the compliance service for our customers. Today I will be talking about the solar panel recycling program and what we have been seeing for the trend of solar panel recycling. Let me see. Okay. So first of all, a little bit introduction about ERI. Even though you may indirectly using our service or directly using our service, ERI founded in 2002. The closest we have been collecting and processing the electronics for about 20 years, and we have 8 different locations across the country. The closest one to Illinois is in Plainfield, Indiana. That is also our largest electronics recycling shredding site compared with the other facilities. So with a wide range of the reverse logistic network and also strategic recycling location, we are able to process about 200 million pounds of the electronics a year in average. So next slide. If you're familiar with ERI, you might know that we always have people, planet, and privacy everywhere. That's because we care about all those things, and that's why we are trying to keep on top of the regulations and also the certification. So on this slide, you can see we have eStore, R2, and NATE for data destruction service. And the R2, they actually are including solar panels to be part of the conversation for end-of-life management. And the ISO certification are for the environmental health and safety perspective. And those certifications, you can really find it from our website. They are all public. So besides our electronics recycling service, we also have enhanced service for our customers, for the corporate and different collectors. But I would like to focus on the compliance service for this presentation. For electronics, there are mainly 2 types of the regulations. One is advanced recycling fee, and another is extended producer responsibility. Both of them are supporting the recycling system and diverting the electronics from being disposed of illegally. However, it is often very complicated when different states have different requirements and expectations. So we are also seeing that solar panels will be covered either EPR or having the advanced recycling fee to occur in the future, but it would be great if this could be happen nationwide. So for solar panels, we have seen the old panels occurring in our facility occasionally when they are mixed with the other electronics. On the right-hand side, the data from IRENA and IEA in 2016, they already estimate that there will be 60 million metric tons of the solar panels will become waste in 2050. Although it is kind of far away, but we wouldn't like to see that just suddenly happen when we didn't do anything. And also we think this is a conservative number because given the fact of the more often unexpected natural disaster happen, and also new technology have been developed for solar panels. They are all occur in different types of forms. So the new solar panels will replace the current even functional solar panels. And Dave also mentioned earlier that secondary market for solar panels is something that we really should consider also to conserve the materials and the electricity or the raw materials need to be done to make a new panels when the old panels are still able to put in the system. And so from the trend we have seen, European Union, they already established the extended producer responsibility on the solar panel back in 2012. And they have a nonprofit organization to help the government and the manufacturers to manage the program. And it has shown the positive impact to divert the solar panels into the channel that can be processed and conserve the materials into the environment. And in the US, Washington State has built a mandatory to require manufacturers to have a solar stewardship program where when they sell the solar panels. And Niagara County, they also work with PSI, require the manufacturer to have a stewardship program for their panels. It is really encouraging to see that state governments are noticing this hidden cost or internalized negative externality in the innovative technology. And also in California, after very long 7 years discussion, we also just classify solar panel as a universal waste, which largely help the collectors and recyclers to store or process the solar panels in the facilities, compared with going to the hazardous recycling facilities, which make the cost of transportation or for the processing just way too high, and that is unnecessary. At ERI, we have built a program which help our customers to transport the solar panels to our facility and process them mechanically. While we just started the program, we are still exploring different methods in order to have a better value from the materials. And I really like the way we are saying all of our outputs are commodity, because that means we are aimed at circling back the materials back to the products in the future. So we are implementing the idea of circular economy and hopefully to loop back the glass and aluminum and solar grade silicone and possibly the polymers to the manufacturing process or even to different products. On the right hand side of this slide, you can see that solar panels are made with multiple layers. And the challenging part is still the glue between those layers on the solar panels that make it very difficult to produce a clean commodity. Although it is still a long run, but it really matters to the environment and even the national security when we rely heavily on a single source of the materials or their imported solar panels. So we found that if there is no incentives or the push from sort of regulations or mandatories, it is very difficult to collect and conserve the materials for the future. There should be more support for the research and development and create a circular ecosystem. That's why at ERI we have worked with several research groups and companies. So we are always happy to explore more opportunities throughout the value chain for new technology. This slide is also just talking about our process and also the composition of the solar panels. From this slide, you can see the left bottom corner that solar panels are largely made of glass. And if we could just use those glass in the future instead of keep exploiting the raw materials from the ground, that is not just environmentally beneficial and also economically great for the country. So this is the end of my presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me or my coworker Dave for any questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lutan. I'm going to bring Dave back in here as well and see if we can address any questions from the audience here in the time that we have remaining. You should be able to see the chat now. Just a couple comments. Let's see here. What do we got? Here's one for the electric car here. I'm not familiar with the Aptera. Do you know much about that one, Dave? I'm sorry, I had you muted there, Dave. My apologies.
No, it's a great concept. What's going to happen here is that we're going to see the development of a lot of new products, as well as the application of those products we have. They're going to be used in new ways. So it's an exciting thing.
Here's a good one. Mary asked this question. I think, Dave, this would go to you.
Well, I did put in the chat my email and phone number, but basically there's a lot of what I've looked for in the last 3 years or so is trying to find some financing mechanism by which the tax breaks can be passed on. And finally, I have those. And that's really important because that reduces the cost to municipalities and things. So the state of Illinois pays a lot in the first 7 years of ownership. And that money that comes in from the state, if that's used to pay down the cost of the solar installation, then the residual amount of note that's left is very low. And it makes the economics change quite a bit for adding solar to any municipal building or wastewater treatment plant. Those use a lot of energy, run 24/7, and many of them have areas for expansion that they don't need for another 20 or 30 years, so they could put that area to work today. I was excited.
I think you mute yourself.
My apologies. I was trying background noise. I had a question for the two of you, maybe that could address this a little. So, Lieutenant, you mentioned the adhesives between some of these polymers being a problem. Is there any work afoot or any solutions at this point for how to manage that? I mean, I know plastics reclamation programs use a lot of washing systems and things, but I'm assuming it's been a bit challenging from what you're saying. Is anything on the future horizon?
Yeah, I do see that there's a solution in the research level that can recover the polymer back to 90%, but those might require the wet process, and that is not really what we are hoping to, or what we are trying to suit EI, because we are trying to have the system that could just integrate into our current system. So that will be something that need to explore a bit deeper.
Very good. I dare bring in the term chemical recycling, but I don't know if ERI is getting involved in moving some of their plastic materials to a system like that in order to try to at least avoid disposal costs if possible. I don't know if you have anything you could comment on that, but
yeah, we are still trying to. I think why we are not super digging in the chemical process is because that often change its original status or the quality. But we are trying to look for the system that could fit into the shredding system to separate the different components, so we can make it become the commodity.
Yeah. I guess if I can get that up there. So Carter had a question about concerns that recycling can account for increase in raw material needs for batteries. Anything in that question that you feel you could answer? Either of you?
Recycling extends the amount of lifetime that you can use something. And so there's a huge value in recycling. You don't run out if you keep using it over and over again. There are costs involved with that, but it helps slow down the need for new raw materials.
Okay.
So I'm a major proponent of very effective recycling legislation, and we heard yesterday about some of the new legislation that might help reduce some of the need for recycling just because of reducing the containers and things of that type.
I'm going to bring Dave Hirschler from ERI in for this as well. I think he had a couple comments that he could address. Dave, if you want to add anything, please do.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think to that question, anything that can be done to try and source more material. So we're doing a lot of research on rare earth recovery and critical mineral recovery, so that even if we can't get everything, at least we can improve and reduce the necessity to mine these limited amounts of materials that are there. But also our understanding from manufacturers is that they are continuing to improve the technology that they are in solar panels to try and reduce the amount that's needed per panel, similar to standard electronics, where the processor used to be a massive amount of gold and silver, et cetera, and now it's a much smaller amount. Similar technology are being developed to reduce the amount of critical minerals needed for panels.
So earlier today, we had James Jennings from IEPA on, and we were talking about this a little bit with, the possibilities of some of the changes or possibly even new laws regarding, manufacturer responsibility and whatnot. One thing I had asked earlier was, or Dave, I'd spoken to you about this, maybe comment again, the reluctancy of manufacturers, or is there that right now? Do you see, how do the let's say that we did have an EPR law in Illinois that would require panels to be recovered and ban them from disposal and landfill ultimately. How do you see that kind of playing out? Would it succeed? There are some other models that are out there right now, correct?
Yeah. So, sorry, Dave. You can go ahead first.
Two Daves.
Well, I was aiming it to Dave Hirschler, but Dave Wilms, you can certainly add anything you'd like to.
Sure. So, so Europe and other areas already have EPR in place for these panels. I think there's a couple of differences in that, because it's a newer technology, manufacturers don't see these laws as something that they're being asked to address issues from 20, 30 years ago. So we haven't heard as much reluctance. I'm not going to say they're going to be outwardly jumping at the gun to support these laws, but we haven't seen the kind of reluctance that there was early days in the e-waste laws. The one reluctance that's out there is that the recycling of this material is still somewhat new. And there's definitely a lot of folks that are out there that maybe are collecting the panels and pulling the aluminum off, and that's calling that recycling, which is 5 to 10%. So I think the EPR laws, the manufacturers, their big push is going to say that the infrastructure and the technology to recycle them properly needs to be better developed. But it's a chicken and egg situation where having these laws is what helps us as a company really push and improve our technology, because we know the volume is going to come to us.
I think that's a great point, and Tan too is probably involved in this compliance aspect. So we've got, for like right now, most people are familiar with R2, E-Stewards, kind of, these ISOs that set the standard for how a processor must operate. So you're saying that something like that would possibly benefit? I mean, we could use something like that to make sure that we're not allowing somebody to say that they're recycling when they're only really recovering maybe 5% of something.
Yeah, I think the definition of recycling, at least for us, is to turn the products back to the commodity. But if you think people they can claim they just remove the aluminum frame, does that count as recycling? Like, what is the degree of recycling we are talking about that should be mentioned or to be defined?
Could an ISO or something like that, an R2, define that?
So the R2 standards really are focused on making sure you're properly managing the material. So if there is no market, for example, R2 and e-stewards will allow us to properly landfill something. It's generally the state laws that are telling us, either as a universal waste law or as or a stewardship law or anything, but it's the state regulations and federal regulation that tells us what recycling means. And so on the e-waste side, every state has their own definitions. Some go too far that technically don't allow for any residual, which there is always residual. And then some, maybe don't go far enough. But the standards themselves are just making sure we're properly handling it. It's the regulations and legislation that impacts, tells us and others what we can and can't do.
So always an evolving topic on that regard. Dave, I did have this one that came up. I don't know if you saw that, but anything. Oh, I'm sorry. I had the wrong one. My bad. So is Carbon Solutions the only game in town? I think you might be able to share that or talk about that a little.
Yeah, I know of two different groups that are allowed by the state to manage the SREC program, which is the Solar Renewable Energy Credit Program. Carbon Solutions is one, and Select Trade is another. And generally, they're hired by the state to help distribute the funds, but both of them are limited by the legislation. And basically, the way the last SREC program worked, and I think it's carried on to this one, is that you get a 15-year contract for producing clean energy. And they give you a credit for each year that you're producing that clean energy. They calculate it over 15 years, and then they give you that money that you would collect over 15 years. They give that to you in the first 5 years, but you're still under contract for the remaining 10 years after the 5-year contract. The new legislation took the 5-year payback and extended it to 7 years. So they pay a little bit more, a little bit less money per year, but they pay it for 7 years versus 5. But I do believe the new contract period is still again for 15 years. So just because you stop receiving checks, they've tied up your array so that you can't apply to new SRECs.
Very good. One of the things too, we talked about batteries a little bit here with some of those collector systems or backup systems. I'm using the wrong term, I know. I mean, is there anything, eventually those have to be replaced too? Is it just scrap commodity that's driving the recovery of that?
Well, the materials, especially the lithium and nickel and some of the other things that they've used in batteries in the past, has value. And batteries can be refreshed. One of the big arguments against electric vehicles is that they create toxic waste. No, because the battery's way worth more, and maybe Lee Tan can help us with this, but the battery's worth more being recycled than it is thrown into a landfill. So most of the time, many of the metals are going to be reutilized rather than just thrown out. The exciting thing is that the battery technology is changing all the time. And I see that the future will offer us new battery options. By the way, the Department of Energy has given the battery oversight development to George Crabtree, who works down at Fermi Labs.
Yeah, and I think several people that are possibly participants today have seen some of those Fermi Lab discussions in other venues, but amazing stuff going on there. To the ERI folks, battery recovery, I mean, is there value in these chemistries, or is it a cost all the way through?
Well, the batteries, especially lithium-ion battery, they like have at least lithium, and other batteries that include nickel or cobalt. They are all critical metals that we have to like conserve in the continent. Otherwise, they are all like over 90% are imported from different countries. So like COVID, it already hit very hard on the supply chain, that we wouldn't, when we are building the new renewable technology system, we need to have the battery to store those energies. Then we cannot rely on the different countries when there's any accidents. So that is very important.
Yeah, a lot of talk about nationalizing our, whatever you want to call them, strategic reserves. But
So to add, there is value, but there's also, especially with lithium, we're doing a lot more investment in safety, fire safety, and other issues like that. So there's more of a cost on management than with standard batteries, but at the same time, there's definitely value in those products, and like Dave said, more value in them than discarding them in a hazardous waste landfill.
All right, and Dave, I know you have a box there, and we talked about that earlier. So you were mentioning it's better to not have these batteries loose and removed from devices whenever possible. Anything to add to that as to what the inherent benefits of leaving them in the equipment?
Yeah, I mean, so lithium batteries are definitely volatile batteries. The risk of fires, I know we talked about, you guys had a session on this earlier yesterday. It is, probably now one of the biggest challenges in the e-waste industry, at least, is managing all of these embedded batteries in new products and new devices. However, they're designed to be housed in equipment. That's what they're used for. So if you have a product with a lithium battery, it's much safer to keep it in that product until it is at a location where it can be safely removed and carefully managed, versus separating it and then potentially leaving it, transporting it without protection, etc. But if you do see a bulging battery or a damaged battery, that's where that should not be transported without proper protection, and you have to make sure to reach out to your service provider or to a Call to Recycle or somebody for what we call a DDR package, a damaged, defective, or recalled battery package, which I was not this randomly was behind us and came up that way, but it has a protective layer inside to kind of stop anything, any kind of fire damage or explosion during transport.
Excellent. Well, I don't know if there's much else. I know, Dave, there was one there about the FIJA. I'm not sure if that's really something that we can address. 5-year contract. It's a little cryptic for my own knowledge, so I'll leave that to you.
Well, there were some people that were early adopters of solar, and they did have a 5-year contract for renewable energy, and then it was over. And those people that have had contracts but they're expired may be able to reapply, and that's kind of a bonus for those individuals. So I would certainly look into that.
Excellent.
I'll throw this out there too. We were talking about batteries in devices. It kind of makes me frustrated when I have a brand new, neat, rechargeable lithium-ion work light, and there's no way to remove the battery from it. So I'm stuck with a large object that's mostly made out of plastic, but I know there's lithium inside there. And I'd love to be able to, when it stops working, actually be able to recycle it. So maybe part of the legislation could be that, the lithium battery sources for these devices always has to be easily removed and recycled, with permanent labeling saying, when this life of this product is done, please remove the lithium battery, and offer a little, money gets things done. Offer a rebate for the lithium that's in that device as an incentive to get it done.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, I think, right? Because designed for recycling, and then as Dave Hirschler was saying, sometimes you don't want that battery removed in order to protect it from being damaged. And so it's a two-way street, but it's also frustrating for people that have a device and the battery fails, and now they've got they can't repair it, or at least most people couldn't.
And the battery could be inside that device expanding like crazy, ready to go off, at any moment. So, to be able to remove it so you can at least see the condition. But you're right. There's pros and cons here, and, research, this is such a dynamic area that changes are happening really, really quickly.
I think Carter is just, talking about right to recycle. It's a good question. It's a good question. It has a question on it. So, absolutely. I don't know how how we address that I don't know if Dave Hirschler, you got any comments about how do we address the proper way to label or these products, or what do we, manufacturers taking responsibility for things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tricky subject. I think I once had a manufacturer tell me that they'd love to make their batteries removable as soon as a consumer is okay dropping their phone in a toilet and still being okay throwing it out. And I've had another manufacturer tell me that, as soon as they get a lawsuit because they gave instructions on how to take apart their phone, and the battery then explodes. And, so there's a lot of legitimate concerns on the manufacturer side, but at the same time, there's also, 100%. I think there are some manufacturers sort of hide behind those concerns, and there should be a way that authorized people or training is available for those people who are able to take apart a device to be able to do that and do that safely and allow for repair. But not necessarily everybody can just take their product apart and take out that battery and put themselves at risk. So it's a very tricky subject, and I'm not going to claim to know the right answer for it.
Yeah, I find it interesting nowadays with more, electronic, commerce and getting things delivered. You'll get a package and it's got the universal labeling on it that it has a rechargeable battery in it. And sometimes you wouldn't even know sometimes that it may have had a battery in it when you bought it, but you get that label. But that label is only there when you receive it. It's not necessarily around when it's no longer usable or desirable to keep. And I think a lot of people don't realize, we had a comment earlier yesterday, we're talking about e-cigarettes, and every one of those has most likely a lithium battery in those dispenser units. And yet they're just, considered disposable in many cases. But, then again, maybe they are going to be regulated under something like an Electronics Act. So Merlan brought up a point about social justice concerns here in battery production. I'm not sure where we fit this in, but there is some of that too, also about the panel manufacturing of, concerns about, where these facilities are and the chemicals they use and things like that. So maybe reduction of toxic substances. I'm not sure. Any comments on that?
Well, I think one of the places that the United States has fallen behind is the development of this technology across the board. We're developing a lot of the technology here, but we don't have the marketplace to build it and manufacture it. And so a lot of people from all over the world come here to learn from our universities and go back to their countries which have a renewable energy market and develop these products. We can move much of that here. As a matter of fact, part of the Build Back Better plan has to do with trying to incentivize local panel manufacturing. And I think if we did the same thing with batteries and the recycling options were much more geographically local, it would help speed a lot of this up. But in third world countries, like even making aluminum, we have certain countries that are producing a lot of aluminum, but they have huge environmental costs for that. And one of the big question marks for reducing carbon and pollution in general is that when we import products from other countries that don't have the environmental regulations that we do here, which is why they're imported from other countries because they're cheaper, but with more harm, should we add a fee for those products that are coming into our borders, whether they use dirty energy and make a lot of carbon in the production of the product, or have a lot of water pollution from their local mining operation? As we move towards a global economy, which we already have, but want to make it more fine-tuned to be both socially just and environmentally friendly, there's a lot of legislation that the United States, which is a huge consumer of goods from around the world, if we had the proper legislation, we could kind of levelize the playing field a little bit and have more production for some of those things here.
Yeah, well, good point. I think you get, like EPR, we talk about eco-modulations, being able to adjust for, if somebody's product is not very sound for recycling, or they would have a higher cost to put that product out on the market. Similar thing. I guess this is sort of in that lane, Dave. Dave Williams, is anybody buying or doing buyback programs? I'm assuming Stephen's talking about panels, but maybe he is focused on batteries. I'm not sure. Any thoughts on that? I'll put that back up.
I'm not sure about buyback programs because most of the panels, since solar, going back to 2010, it was $10 a watt, basically, for installation of a solar panel. And now we're down for larger systems, less than $1.50 a watt. And so most of the systems that 10 years ago were installed are still operating. I do know one gentleman that had to re-roof his house. The panels were fine, but the house needed re-roofing, so he had to take everything apart. He had 200 watt panels on his roof, and now he's boosting them up to over 300 watts. And so I do not know, but I'm curious now. I'll ask him what he did with his old panels, because we should develop a market both globally and locally for older panels that are still durable and capable of producing electricity.
So question to ERI. I mean, you guys, I don't know if you dabble in resale that much anymore, but I mean, is there a market out there for resale on these?
Yeah. So going back in terms of the buyback program, I mean, recycling does cost money, even if there's value in the product. By far, the cost usually outweighs the value of the product. And so, right now we haven't seen anybody doing any buyback. When there is a buyback, it's more of an incentive, and not actually because there's revenue in those products. On the resale side of things, yes, we do a lot of resale of product. Right now, and Lee-Tan, you can probably chime in, you know this part better, but right now, in terms of solar, most of the resale opportunities are in the developing world. And we are cautiously looking at that market, but we also have to be aware that if we're taking a panel, we need to make sure we have the right testing so that we're not taking a panel that will be dead in 5 years and exporting it somewhere that then does not have a proper mechanism to handle it. And so we're hoping that as these programs grow and as the volume increases, the markets will develop better and the testing technology will be developed better so that we can resell them and be confident in that process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle. And I was just thinking about, so these old panels that have been out there, there was never any fee on them. But moving forward, maybe we would have an eco fee or an advanced recovery fee, an ARF, as some people like to call it, on panels. Now, it would raise the cost of a panel for future sales of new product, which could maybe bring the cost of a refurb in, a better light. I don't know how long that would sustain itself, though. Be interesting.
Actually, so I just want to bring up that PV Cycle. They are the European NGO that focusing on solar panel recycling. They actually just published an article talking about to standardize the solar panels for secondary market. Like if only the solar panels, they still have their 70% efficiency, can only above that you can sell. If it's lower than that, maybe you shouldn't sell. Otherwise, it's like maybe lasts for 2-3 years. So that would be something that we can refer to.
Well, I'm certainly excited that this topic has got legs for a lot more continuations, and my hope is that maybe next year at ILCSWMA we come back and we've got another story to share about some of these things that we talked about possibly moving forward. So with that said, I know we're at a little over time now, so I do want to thank you all for attending and everyone for presenting today. I think it was a very good conversation. Great way to end our day. And if there's any more comments, anybody wants to add anything, please look everybody up on here. Their information is on the Hop-In page, contacts. And again, it'll all be published and available on the ILCSWMA.org website in the coming days. So with that said, I'm going to say thank you to all, and we're going to sign off, and we'll see you November 2022 in Starved Rock. So thanks again, everybody.
Thanks.